The vast emptiness of space swallowed the wreckage of the Vengeful, humanity's once proud flagship. Its shattered hull drifted aimlessly, its engines cold and broken, no longer capable of the blazing speed that had once cut through the stars like a blade. The final battle had been brutal, leaving Captain Zara Annalus with only fragments of her once mighty fleet and a handful of survivors scattered across distant, uncharted worlds. A defeat so devastating, it could have crushed any lesser leader. But Zara wasn't like the others. She was human, and that alone made her dangerous. Aboard a small, hidden outpost on the desert world of Sindaranine, Zara stood before the war map, the display flickering weakly. Her fingers traced the paths of the ships lost to the Xaltari, the empire that had swept through the galaxy, tearing apart every system it touched. The Xaltari were ruthless, their armies countless, their technology far beyond anything humanity could hope to match. But Zara knew one thing. The Xaltari had underestimated humanity's capacity for survival. She glanced up from the map, her eyes scanning the faces of the few soldiers who remained loyal to her. They were battered, bruised, and scarred, not just physically, but mentally as well. They had seen too much death, too much loss. Yet, as Zora's gaze swept across them, she saw something else beneath their exhaustion. The same fire that had once fueled the Crimson Fleet, the same relentless will that had driven humanity to rise from nothing and build the empire that Xaltari had just crushed. It was that fire Zara was counting on. "Gather the survivors," Zara commanded, her voice low but firm. "We're not done yet." The soldiers around her hesitated. They were survivors, yes, but they knew the odds. They had watched their friends and comrades die in the cold depths of space, consumed by the unrelenting Xaltari onslaught. But Zara was their captain, and in her they saw a glimmer of hope, a thread of defiance that refused to snap. The decision was made. Over the next few days, Zora's command center became a hub of frantic activity. Faint signals were intercepted, and the scattered fleet began to respond to her call. The survivors, those still alive and unbroken, would come together under her banner. But there was something more Zara needed, the key to humanity's survival. On a mission to a forgotten moon, Zara uncovered an ancient relic buried deep within the planet's surface. It was an artifact, an old weapon of some kind, hidden by humanity's long-lost ancestors. Legends spoke of weapons that could shape the fate of entire civilizations, weapons that had been abandoned when the ancient human empire fell to ruin. This relic, if it worked, could turn the tide against the Xaltari. But it was not just a weapon. It was a piece of humanity's legacy, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a species that refused to go quietly into the void. The weight of the discovery settled heavily on Zora's shoulders. With this weapon, humanity had a fighting chance, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The Xaltari would hunt them down. The relic's power was something the Empire could not afford to let exist. But if there was one thing Zara knew about humans, it was this. They would fight, not because they had to, but because they could not bear the thought of being enslaved, of being wiped out like an afterthought. As the survivors of the Crimson Fleet began to rally under Zora's command, a message was broadcast to the galaxy. It was short, but its implications were clear. Humanity is not dead. We are coming. Prepare. The spark of rebellion had been lit. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to face the wrath of the human race. The remnants of the Crimson Fleet were scattered, isolated on forgotten moons, derelict stations, and inhospitable worlds. Zara knew that survival required more than just a few loyal soldiers. It demanded unity. The Xaltari Empire's reach was vast, its armies nearly unstoppable. But Zara also knew that the key to their defeat wasn't in brute force alone. It was in the power of alliances. Humanity had always been at its strongest when it worked alongside others, when it formed bonds with those who shared the will to fight for freedom. The first step in her plan was to gather those who had not been entirely crushed by the Xaltari. She knew of several independent factions, all of them struggling under the oppressive rule of the Empire. some on the fringes of known space, others in the heart of it. Zara would have to navigate a galaxy fractured by years of conflict, convincing races that had long distrusted humanity that together they could rise up against the common threat. She was the only one who could make that case. Her first stop was Arduor 4, a barren mining world once rich in resources, but now under heady Saltari occupation. Zara had fought alongside the Arduorians years ago, when their homeworld had resisted an earlier Saltari incursion. Their warriors were brutal, their loyalty fierce, but they were also deeply proud, and no one had ever dared approach them for help since their defeat. Zara couldn't afford hesitation. She arrived in the dead of night, her small fleet cloaking itself as it entered Arduor 4's atmosphere. Zara landed with only a handful of trusted officers and a mission: convince the Arduorians to join the fight or watch their world burn under Saltari domination. It wasn't going to be easy. Zara met with their leaders in a cave beneath the planet's surface. The Arduorian High Council, grim-faced and resolute, listened in silence as Zara spoke of the destruction of the Crimson Fleet and the new weapon they had discovered, an artifact that could change the course of the war. But Zara did not stop there. She appealed to their pride, to their honor, reminding them of the blood they had spilled together and the debt they owed to the fallen. She painted a picture of what would happen if they refused to join her: more worlds burned, more civilizations destroyed, and eventually their own people erased from history. "You've fought beside humans before," Zara said, her voice unwavering. "Now fight with us again. Together, we can make the Saltari bleed." There was a long pause. Then the High Chief, a towering figure named Kor, spoke. "You ask for much, Captain. We lost everything the last time we fought beside you. Why should we trust you now?" "Because we have nothing left to lose," Zara replied. "And because we're not giving up. Not now, not ever." It was a simple answer, but it struck at the core of the Arduorian spirit. After what seemed like an eternity, Kor nodded, signaling the agreement. The Arduorians would join the Crimson Alliance. With the Arduorians on her side, Zara moved quickly to form other alliances. The Sathari, a technologically advanced but secretive race, were next. They had little interest in helping others, but Zara made them an offer they couldn't refuse: technology to combat the Saltari's superior weapons in exchange for the promise that humanity would honor their autonomy and their technology. It was a delicate negotiation, one that came close to falling apart more than once, but in the end, Zara's persistence paid off. Then came the Yarn, a fierce race of nomads who controlled vast stretches of space. Their warriors were renowned, but they had no love for centralized authority. Zara appealed to their sense of freedom, showing them that the Saltari Empire was the real threat to their way of life. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. With each new ally, Zara's coalition grew stronger. But she knew the true test would come when they faced the Saltari directly, when they confronted the empire that had crushed humanity's greatest fleet. She also understood that in a galaxy so fractured, trust would always be in short supply. But if the human race had learned anything, it was how to fight together, how to stand firm against a storm that threatened to tear them apart. As the first battles of the Alliance began, Zara watched the shipyards fill with new warships, the human-built Red Hammer nearing completion, and the promise of victory feeling more real with each passing day. Her fleet was small, but its heart was mighty. The human spirit would not be snuffed out, and together with their new allies, they would bring the Saltari Empire to its knees. The journey had only just begun. The battle for Bloodmoon was not just a raid, it was a statement. The Crimson Alliance, though still a fragile coalition of various species, had never faced anything like the full wrath of the Saltari before. Zara knew that if they could seize this crucial resource world, one rich in metals necessary to build their forces, it would signal to the galaxy that the Saltari were not invincible. It was a gamble, but a necessary one. Zara stood on the command deck of the Vengeful's temporary flagship, the Valkyrie. The ship, though scared and patched together from various salvaged materials, had become a symbol of resilience for the crew. Around her, the bridge hummed with activity as the fleet prepared for the assault. The Arduorians were readying their brutal ground forces. The Sci-Fi were calibrating the newly acquired technology that could pierce Saltari shields, and the Yarn had given their warriors a mission: fight or die. Blood Moon, once a beautiful world teeming with life, was now a dying planet. The Saltari had strip-mined its surface for decades, and now only vast, dust-choked cities remained, inhabited by the Saltari's ruthless military forces. Zara's intelligence had confirmed the presence of a heavy garrison, including the Saltari's elite warriors, and the heavily fortified command center deep within Blood Moon's largest city. The plan was simple: a two-pronged assault. The main fleet would engage the Saltari in orbit, drawing their attention and distracting them long enough for the ground forces to land and take control of the planet's primary resource mines. But Zara knew that the true test of their resolve would come when they had to fight their way through the streets and towers of the Saltari-controlled cities, where guerrilla tactics would make every inch of ground hard-earned. As the fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the view of Blood Moon filled the viewport, a world now scared and dying under the Saltari's greedy grasp. Zara's jaw tightened. This was personal now. The stakes had never been higher, and failure would mean the end for them all. "Captain," called Commander Xara, her Arduorian counterpart, "we're in position. The Saltari have taken the bait and launched their defenses. It's time." Zara nodded, already calculating the next move. She had no illusions about the risks. The Saltari had been preparing for a strike, and now that it was here, the full force of their military might would come crashing down. It was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. "Begin the assault. Initiate Phase 1, Zara ordered. The Crimson Alliance's fleet surged forward, launching waves of missiles and energy blasts at the Saltari defenses. In orbit, the battle was chaos. Zara watched as the familiar dark shapes of the Saltari warships moved to intercept them. Their superior weapons cut through the blackness, flashing across the stars in bursts of deadly light. The Valkyrie took heavy fire, shaking under the impact, but Zara remained unshaken, her voice steady as she barked commands. Meanwhile, the ground forces were already descending on the surface, Arduorian drop pods crashing onto Blood Moon's dust-choked plains. Zara's communications buzzed with reports from the surface. The Arduorians fought with savage precision, pushing back against the entrenched Saltari troops. But the Saltari weren't going to let go of this world so easily. Zara's heart raced as the battle in orbit raged on. The Crimson Alliance fleet had to hold out long enough for the ground forces to succeed. Then her comms officer, Lieutenant Yara, shouted over the noise of the bridge, "Captain, the Sci-Fi technology is working. Their energy shields are failing." That was the opening they needed. Zara's pulse quickened. With the Saltari shields down, her fleet would have a fighting chance. "Target their flagship. Full power to forward guns," Zara commanded. The bridge fell silent as her order was executed. A moment later, the flagship of the Saltari fleet, a massive vessel known as the Sovereign, exploded in a blinding flash of light. The death of their command ship sent the Saltari forces into disarray. The human-led fleet pressed forward, its ships tearing through the remaining defenses with a ferocity that stunned even Zara. On the ground, the fighting was just as brutal. The streets of Blood Moon's largest city became a maze of destruction. The Arduorians led the charge, their heavy plasma rifles tearing through Saltari infantry with devastating force. Zara watched the battle unfold on the holotable as the Yarn forces advanced, their shock troops breaking through barricades and enemy lines. The Saltari's once pristine metropolis now burned, a testament to the cost of rebellion. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Crimson Alliance began to secure the mines and key infrastructure. Victory was within reach, but Zara could feel the tension. The Saltari wouldn't surrender without one final bloody push. As the last pockets of resistance fell, Zara stood with her officers, her heart still pounding in her chest. The cost had been high. Too many lives lost. But they had succeeded. Blood Moon was now under their control, and the resource they had fought so hard for was theirs to use. This victory, though hard won, sent a message to the galaxy. The Crimson Alliance had arrived, and the Xaltari Empire's reign of terror was finally beginning to unravel. But Zara knew this was only the beginning. The Xaltari would not forget this humiliation, and the fight was far from over. The victory on Blood Moon was a turning point, but Zara knew it would mean little if they couldn't capitalize on it. The resource-rich world provided them with the tools they needed to rebuild, but what they truly needed was a weapon powerful enough to pierce the heart of the Xaltari Empire. And that weapon had been under construction for weeks. The Red Hammer was not just a ship. It was a symbol, human ingenuity and resolve embodied in steel and fire. Zara had put everything into its creation, pouring the combined resources of the Crimson Alliance into the project. The ship's design was based on ancient human tech, augmented by the Sathari's advanced energy shields and Arduorian weaponry. It was a monster of destruction, capable of leveling a fortress or cleaving through an entire fleet with its devastating Nova cannons. Its massive frame gleamed under the artificial lights of the shipyard, a testament to humanity's unyielding spirit. Zara stood before the ship's command console, her fingers brushing lightly over the controls. In many ways, the Red Hammer represented everything they had fought for: the determination to reclaim their place in the galaxy, to show the Xaltari that no matter how many times humanity was knocked down, it would always rise. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Yara, breaking her thoughts. "We're ready for the trial run. The Red Hammer is fully operational." Zara nodded, her heart racing. This was it. The Red Hammer had to succeed. If it didn't, their momentum would grind to a halt. They couldn't afford to fail. "Activate all systems. Let's see what she can do," Zara commanded. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the Red Hammer lurched forward. Zara felt the vibrations run through the deck beneath her feet as the massive vessel began to rise from the launch bay. She watched as the ship's enormous silhouette took shape against the backdrop of space. It was awe-inspiring. "We're locked on to a Xaltari convoy in the Zenter Nebula," Yara reported. "They're transporting reinforcements. If we strike now, we can cut them off before they reach their destination." "Good," Zara said, her voice calm but with a hard edge. "We can't let them regroup. Let's show them what humanity's made of." The fleet made its way toward the nebula, the eerie red and purple clouds of the Zenter Nebula swirling ominously around them. As they approached, Zara activated the ship's long-range sensors, watching the Xaltari convoy move slowly toward their base. There were 5 ships in the convoy, heavily armored, but still vulnerable to the Red Hammer's firepower. Zara's strategy was simple: hit them hard and fast, before they could even attempt to retaliate. "Target the lead ship," Zara ordered. "Full power to the Nova cannons." The crew went silent as they braced for impact. The Red Hammer came into position, the weapon systems locking onto the Xaltari vessels. A deep, rumbling roar filled the air as the ship's massive cannons charged. Zara's eyes narrowed, watching the target with an intensity that could burn through metal. In that moment, the future of the Alliance hung in the balance. "Firing now," said Yara. The Nova cannon unleashed a burst of energy so powerful it illuminated the nebula in a violent flash. The lead Xaltari ship exploded in a fireball of twisted metal and sparks, disintegrating in the blink of an eye. The shockwave rippled outward, forcing the remaining Xaltari vessels to veer off course in an attempt to avoid the blast. "Direct hit. 1 ship down," Yara said, her voice filled with awe. Zara didn't waste a second. "Keep firing. Target the next one." The Red Hammer unleashed a barrage of missile pods, each one packed with enough firepower to obliterate an entire fleet. The second Xaltari ship was caught in the explosion, its shields faltering under the relentless barrage. Within moments, it too was reduced to a smoldering wreck. A cheer erupted from the crew, But Zara didn't allow herself to join in. This was only the beginning. The Exalteri still had plenty of forces left, and they would come for them. They couldn't afford to be distracted. 3 ships remain, Zara said, her voice cutting through the excitement. Target their engines. We need them disabled, not destroyed. The red hammer fired again, its powerful beam cutting through the 3rd ship's engines with surgical precision. The vessel spun out of control, drifting helplessly in the vacuum of space. The final 2 ships, realizing the fight was over, attempted to flee. But it was already too late. The Red Hammer's weapon systems locked onto the last 2 targets. A few more shots, and both ships were wiped from existence. The battle was over in a matter of minutes. The Zenter Nebula was now littered with the wreckage of the Exalteri convoy. The Red Hammer had proven its worth, its firepower unmatched, its precision terrifying. Zara stood at the front of the bridge, looking out over the devastation they had wrought. "We've sent them a message," Zara said quietly. "Humanity is coming for them, and we won't stop until they're gone." With the destruction of the Exalteri convoy, the Crimson Alliance had gained a critical victory, but Zara knew this was just the beginning. The Red Hammer had proven its potential, but they still had to confront the full might of the Exalteri Empire. A larger battle awaited them, and it would be one for the fate of the galaxy. The real war had just begun. The destruction of the Exalteri convoy sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Exalteri Empire had never expected a challenge like the Crimson Alliance. The Red Hammer's debut had shattered the illusion of invincibility the Empire had built over centuries of ruthless conquest. Zara knew this would only enrage the Exalteri, making them desperate. She didn't know how long their small alliance could hold out before the full weight of the Empire came crashing down on them. But she did know one thing. They had to strike while they had momentum. After the successful strike in the Zenter Nebula, Zara returned to the fleet's command station aboard the Valkyrie, a gathering of minds ready to plan the next move. The Arduorians were pushing hard to secure more of Bloodmoon's mines, but Zara's instincts told her that the Exalteri would retaliate soon, and the last thing she wanted was to spread her forces too thin. "The Exalteri will be regrouping and coming after us with everything they have," Zara said, her voice steady despite the weight of the coming storm. "We can't afford to wait. We need to find their flagship, the Sovereign. We cripple that, and we cripple their command structure." Lieutenant Yara's eyes flicked over the data streams. "We've been intercepting signals, Captain. The Exalteri are mobilizing a fleet in the Hesperian cluster. It's a trap." Zara felt her heart tighten. The Hesperian cluster was a labyrinth of asteroid fields, debris, and cloaking anomalies, an ideal place for an ambush. The Exalteri knew this system better than anyone, and a well-placed trap could lead to their complete annihilation. The question wasn't whether they would fall into it. The question was if they could turn the tables. "We'll use their own trap against them," Zara said, her mind already racing through the tactical possibilities. "Get the Satheri on high alert. They've got the tech to see through the cloaks, and we'll need that advantage." Commander Xera, the Arduorian, nodded. "We'll have our forces ready for a direct assault. We'll hit them hard, Captain." But Zara wasn't just counting on the brute strength of her fleet. She had another card to play. A gamble, one that could shift the balance of the entire war. A series of encrypted messages from the Satheri had revealed something unexpected. There was a faction within the Exalteri Empire that was not entirely loyal to the Central Authority, a faction seeking to overthrow the High Command. This splinter group was known as the Silent Storm, and they had grown disillusioned with the Empire's leadership. They had contacted Zara, offering their support in exchange for sanctuary and a promise that their leaders would not be hunted down after the war. Zara wasn't about to ignore an opportunity like that. She set the plan into motion, sending covert messages to the Silent Storm's leaders, requesting a face-to-face meeting. The rendezvous point was set, an abandoned mining outpost on the edge of the Hesperian cluster. If everything went according to plan, The Silent Storm would provide them with insider information and sabotage operations within the Saltari fleet. The fleet assembled near the outpost, a calculated mix of patience and anticipation hanging in the air. Zara stood at the bridge of the Valkyrie, her mind sharp, every possible outcome playing out in her mind. If this alliance with the Silent Storm worked, it would give them the edge they needed to pierce the heart of the Saltari's command and sow chaos within their ranks. The moment of truth came. Zora was in a small shuttle, heading toward the designated location. On board, she could sense the unease among her officers. The Silent Storm was an unknown entity. Could they be trusted? But Zara had no choice. If they didn't take risks now, they'd be overrun. Upon landing, Zara was greeted by the leader of the Silent Storm, a Saltari officer named Vark, whose sharp, angular features and cold eyes spoke of his commitment to his cause. Captain Annalus, Vark greeted her with a nod. You have my word that we will destroy the Empire from within. But we must move quickly. The Sovereign is already on its way to engage your fleet. We don't have much time. Zora extended a hand, her grip firm. We're ready to act, Vark. Lead the way. Vark's intel proved invaluable. He provided Zora's forces with details about the Saltari flagship, the Sovereign, including the location of its most vulnerable systems and internal communications channels. Armed with this inside knowledge, Zora devised a daring assault. The Silent Storm's operatives would infiltrate the Saltari flagship, sabotaging critical systems, while Zora's fleet moved in for the final blow. Back aboard the Valkyrie, the battle was already underway. The Saltari fleet, large and powerful, loomed ahead, ready to crush the Alliance's forces. But Zara had one advantage they didn't expect. The Silent Storm's sabotage mission had begun. The two forces collided in the Hesperian cluster, an all-out battle within the asteroid field. The Saltari fleet was caught off guard as key systems aboard the Sovereign faltered. Zara's ships, using the cover of the debris field, moved in swiftly. The Red Hammer blasted through Saltari defenses like a wrecking ball, while the Valkyrie and its allies harassed the remaining ships with precision strikes. Zara watched from the command deck as the Sovereign staggered, its massive form beginning to crumble under the relentless assault. The Silent Storm's sabotage had turned the tide. With one final blast from the Red Hammer, the Sovereign exploded in a flash of light. The flagship was gone. The Saltari Empire had lost its heart. The battle was won, but Zara knew it wasn't the end. The Saltari would regroup. But for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear, hope. The Empire was no longer invincible, and with every victory, the Crimson Alliance grew bolder. The war had only just begun, and they were ready to take the fight to the Empire's doorstep. The fall of the Sovereign was a momentous victory for the Crimson Alliance, but Zara knew the road ahead was far from smooth. The Saltari Empire, though shaken, was far from defeated. Their fleet had suffered a significant blow, but their numbers were vast, their leadership ruthless, and their resolve unbreakable. They would come for her, and they would come hard. In the aftermath of the battle, Zora's fleet limped back to Blood Moon, battered and bruised. The Red Hammer and the Valkyrie were still in working order, but many of their smaller ships had taken heavy damage, and some had been lost entirely. Even with their technological advantage, Zara knew that they were still outnumbered and under-resourced. The aftermath of the battle left a bitter taste in Zara's mouth. Despite their success, the cost had been high. Too many lives had been lost, and even now, the full extent of the damage to her fleet was unclear. The adrenaline of battle was fading, and the weight of what lay ahead was setting in. "We need a new strategy," Zara said, pacing in the command center. The map on the holographic table displayed the shifting lines of control between the Crimson Alliance and the Saltari Empire. It was a war of attrition, and as the days passed, Zara felt the tension rise within her. The Empire would likely launch a counteroffensive soon, and they needed to be ready. The response from the galaxy was growing stronger, though. The news of the Sovereign's destruction had spread like wildfire. Factions across the galaxy, rebel groups, outlaws, and independent systems began offering their support. The message was clear. The Saltari Empire was no longer invincible, but these new allies were untested and unreliable. Zara couldn't afford to put all her faith in them. "Are we sure about this, Captain?" Commander Zara asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "The Silent Storm has given us valuable intel, but can we trust them for the long haul? They have their own agenda." Zara's eyes narrowed as she considered the question. The Silent Storm had been an unexpected ally, and while their information had been invaluable, Zara knew their motives weren't entirely pure. Vark, their leader, had made it clear that his faction sought power in the New Order, and while they had helped dismantle the Sovereign, Zara was not naive enough to assume their loyalty was permanent. "We don't have a choice," Zara said, her voice firm. "If we don't act now, the Empire will come for us with everything they've got. We need to disrupt their supply chains, destabilize their leadership, and strike where they least expect it." Zara turned her gaze toward the holomap again, pinpointing their next target, a key Saltari supply hub located in the Polaris system. The hub was responsible for funneling vital resources to the Empire's war machine. Without it, the Empire's ability to maintain its fleet and keep their soldiers fed would be severely crippled. "We hit them fast," Zara said, a spark of determination in her eyes. "The Saltari are already scrambling to regroup. This is our chance to knock them down when they're at their weakest." The Red Hammer and the Valkyrie would lead the assault, but Zara knew it would take more than just firepower to win this. They had to outsmart the Saltari, and for that, they would need a diversion. "Get the Sathari in position," Zara instructed, turning toward Lieutenant Yara. "I want their cloaking technology up and running. We'll send in a small stealth team to infiltrate the hub's inner workings while the fleet provides a show of force." The plan was risky, but Zara had no doubt it would work. The Saltari had become too reliant on their overwhelming numbers, too confident in their power. They would never expect the Crimson Alliance to strike so deep within their territory. As the fleet made its way toward the Polaris system, Zara stood on the bridge, staring out at the cold expanse of space. The tension was palpable. This mission was their chance to strike a crippling blow to the Saltari, but it was also a test. If they failed, the Empire would come for them with all the wrath of a scorned predator. In the quiet moments before the operation began, Zara found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She had once commanded a vast fleet, proud and strong. But now, she was leading a ragtag alliance of races, each with their own struggles, their own ambitions. They were fragile, but in their unity, they had become something more. They had become a force to be reckoned with. The Red Hammer dropped out of hyperspace, followed closely by the rest of the fleet. The Polaris system loomed ahead, its supply hub a glowing beacon of Saltari power. "Prepare for battle," Zara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "This is where we make our stand." The attack was about to begin. This would either be the final step toward victory or the beginning of the end. But Zara was ready. She had come too far to turn back now. The Saltari had underestimated humanity before, and that would be their downfall. The fight for the galaxy was far from over, but Zara knew one thing. The Crimson Alliance would stop at nothing to win. The assault on the Polaris system was swift, violent, and calculated. Zara stood at the helm of the Valkyrie, the flagship of the Crimson Alliance, watching as their fleet moved into position. The Saltari hub loomed in the distance, an industrial fortress encased in layers of defensive shields and heavily armed platforms. The operation had one goal: disrupt the flow of resources, cripple the Empire's production, and strike a blow that would ripple through the core of their war machine. The fleet, led by the Red Hammer and the Valkyrie, emerged from the shadows of the nearby asteroid field. The Saltari, caught off guard by their stealthy approach, scrambled to respond. Their defensive platforms lit up with blinding beams of energy, but Zara was ready. With a flick of her wrist, the battle plan was set into motion. "Deploy the Sathari cloaked ships," Zara commanded, her voice cold and sharp. She'd already anticipated this exact moment, that Salteri's overconfidence would be their undoing. The Sathari vessels, invisible to the enemy sensors, began darting toward the supply hub, taking advantage of the distraction caused by the main fleet's engagement. "Commence the attack," Zara ordered. The Red Hammer was the first to fire, its Nova cannons lighting up the void with bursts of lethal energy. The shockwaves from the impact rocked the Salteri hub, sending debris flying into space. Zara watched the devastation unfold. The Salteri had made one critical mistake. They hadn't anticipated the full firepower of the Red Hammer. Their shields, still struggling to react to the barrage, buckled under the intensity of the attack. The rest of the fleet engaged immediately, sweeping in to cover the Red Hammer as it made its approach. A swarm of smaller ships darted in, cutting down enemy fighters and clearing the way for the main assault. The Valkyrie and the remaining Alliance ships launched their full arsenal, sending devastating waves of missiles and plasma fire toward the Salteri defenses. However, the Salteri were far from helpless. Their retaliatory strikes came fast and with deadly precision, but their coordination was lacking. Their command infrastructure was still reeling from the blow to the Sovereign, and without their flagship, the Salteri were in disarray. Zara saw this as an opening, and she moved quickly. "Target their weak points," she instructed, looking at the data streams on the command console. "Focus on their reactor cores and weapon caches." The attack was brutal, a systematic dismantling of the hub's outer defenses. But even as the Alliance pressed its advantage, Zara knew they couldn't waste time. The Sathari were deep within the facility now, planting explosives in key structural points. The clock was ticking. Down below, the battle on the surface of the hub was just as fierce. The stealth team of Sathari operatives infiltrated the facility with ease, disabling critical systems and planting charges throughout the sprawling complex. Vark and his silent storm forces moved like ghosts, striking swiftly before disappearing into the shadows. Zara's heart pounded as she knew the plan was working, but they had to get out before the entire station went up in flames. "The Sathari have completed the mission," Yara reported, her voice tense. "They've set the charges. We need to pull back immediately." Zara didn't hesitate. "Pull the fleet back, full retreat. We're done here." The retreat was just as calculated as the attack. With their mission complete and the supply hub now on the verge of collapse, the Alliance ships began to disengage, heading for open space. But the Salteri weren't finished. They sent their reinforcements, a secondary fleet that had been lurking in the nearby system, eager to avenge the damage inflicted on their supply lines. "Brace for incoming fire," Zara warned as the new fleet arrived in force. The Valkyrie and the Red Hammer moved into position, forming the core of the retreating fleet as their smaller vessels scrambled to escape. The Salteri ships opened fire, and the space between the two fleets erupted into chaos. Zara's fleet fired back, but with the damage they had sustained, every shot was a gamble. The Salteri, though disorganized, had the numbers, but Zara's fleet had speed, and they used it to their advantage. The Alliance ships darted through the asteroid field, taking evasive action while returning fire. The Red Hammer provided cover fire, sending massive bursts of energy at the Salteri ships that were too close for comfort. "Target their forward vessels," Zara ordered. "We can't outrun them, but we can make them fear us." The Red Hammer fired once more, taking out a flagship of the Salteri fleet in a glorious explosion that sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. The Salteri flagship went down in flames, disorienting their forces even further. Zara's fleet had gained a critical window to escape. "Hold formation," Zara said, her voice calm but commanding as her crew executed the orders. "We're not out of this yet." Just as they began to make the final push for hyperspace, the Salteri sent one last desperate barrage, But Zara had already plotted their escape route. With the last of their strength, the fleet engaged their hyperdrives, vanishing into the folds of space just as the Saltari's final shots missed their mark. Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The fleet was alive, and the mission had been a success. The Pelorus hub was destroyed, and the Saltari's supply lines had been shattered. It was another victory, another step toward liberation. But Zara's thoughts immediately turned to the bigger picture. The Saltari Empire was bruised, but they were not beaten. The war was far from over, and the true battle for the galaxy had yet to begin. The Crimson Alliance was ready for whatever came next. The victory at Pelorus had sent a shockwave through the galaxy, but Zara knew it was only one battle in a much larger war. The Saltari Empire, despite the destruction of their supply hub, was far from finished. The Alliance had inflicted serious damage, but the Saltari were relentless. Zara's fleet was battered, their resources stretched thin, and the toll of war was starting to show on her crew. She knew they couldn't sustain this level of pressure indefinitely. The Empire was powerful, and its reach was vast. Back aboard the Valkyrie, Zara stood at the command console, eyes narrowed as she studied the strategic map before her. The Saltari had regrouped quickly, their remaining forces consolidating around key strongholds deep within their home territories. Zara's fleet was smaller now, but still formidable. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. They had to strike at the heart of the Empire, and they had to do it before the Saltari could rebuild. "There's no way around it," Zara muttered to herself, tapping a finger against the map. "We take the fight to the Saltari homeworld." The moment she said it, there was no turning back. Zara knew what this meant: an all-out assault on the Empire's capital. The Saltari would throw everything they had at them, but if they could land a decisive blow, it could cripple the entire Empire. It was a risk, but Zara had no illusions about the war anymore. Either they would win this final battle, or they would lose everything. Lieutenant Yara entered the command center, her eyes filled with concern. "Captain, are you sure about this? This could be the end. We can't afford to be reckless." Zara met her gaze, unwavering. "We're already in this too deep. The longer we wait, the stronger they get. If we strike at the heart of their empire, we can break their will to fight. We'll be fighting on their home turf, but if we don't make this move now, we'll lose the momentum." Yara nodded slowly, then turned toward the rest of the crew. "All systems on high alert. We're making our move." As the fleet prepared for the final assault, Zara gathered her closest officers for a briefing. She laid out the plan: an all-out attack on the Saltari homeworld. They would enter through the outer rim, bypassing most of the Empire's outer defenses, and strike directly at the heart of their capital. It wouldn't be easy, but it was their best shot at ending the war. "We have one chance to win this," Zara said, her voice calm but filled with the weight of the decision. "This will be the most dangerous mission we've ever undertaken. We'll be outnumbered and outgunned. But if we hit them hard, if we hit them fast, we can end this war once and for all." Her officers nodded, grim but resolute. The time had come to face the Saltari Empire head-on. The journey to the Saltari homeworld was long and fraught with danger. The fleet encountered resistance from smaller enemy groups along the way, but Zara's forces pressed on, overcoming every obstacle with ruthless efficiency. The closer they got, the more Zara felt the weight of their actions. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was the final confrontation that would determine the fate of countless lives across the galaxy. As they neared the Saltari capital, the fleet emerged from hyperspace into a trap. The Saltari had anticipated their attack and prepared an ambush. A massive fleet of dreadnoughts and cruisers surrounded them, cutting off any chance of escape. The odds were staggering. The battle that followed was a furious clash of titanic forces, each side pouring everything they had into the conflict. The Red Hammer fired relentlessly, its Nova cannons tearing through enemy ships with surgical precision. But the Saltari, desperate to protect their homeworld, fought with a fury that matched Zora's own. Their fleet was massive, their ships well armed, and their tactics deadly. "We need to punch through their lines," Zora said, her voice tight with urgency. "We can't waste time fighting these smaller vessels. Target their flagship." The Red Hammer locked onto the largest ship in the Saltari fleet, a gargantuan dreadnought that seemed to pulse with dark energy. Zara's heart pounded as she watched the massive warship loom in their sights. If they could destroy it, they might be able to break the Saltari's resolve. The battle intensified as the Valkyrie and the other ships in the fleet engaged in a vicious firefight. The energy shields flared and sputtered, and explosions rocked the battlefield. The Saltari flagship was heavily protected, but Zara's forces were determined. "Full power to the forward cannons," Zara barked. "All hands, brace for impact." With a mighty roar, the Red Hammer unleashed its full power, the Nova cannons firing directly at the heart of the Saltari flagship. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The blast hit with the force of a supernova, shattering the enemy ship's shields and piercing its armor. The flagship buckled and exploded in a fiery burst, sending shockwaves through the surrounding ships. The Saltari fleet faltered. The loss of their flagship sent them into disarray, and Zara's forces took full advantage of the opening. The battle raged on, but now it was clear the tide had turned. The Saltari were breaking. As the final remnants of the enemy fleet crumbled, Zara stood at the command console, watching the destruction unfold. They had done it. The heart of the Empire had been shattered, and with it, the will of the Saltari to continue the fight. The war was over. Humanity, along with their allies, had won. The galaxy would be forever changed by their victory, and Zara knew that they had proven something far more important than just military might. They had proven that no empire, no matter how vast or powerful, could stand against the unity and resolve of humanity. And with that, Zara turned to her crew, her heart filled with pride and determination. The stars were now within their reach.